Hey Rex, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Good, good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Rex, we'll get straight into it now. If you give everyone just a very quick overview of you right now, like what your role is, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So right now for about the past year, I've been head of quality at BBio. So leading up the quality organization and trying to charge through.
Very good, very good. Right, so let's take it back then. Tell us about your route into the biotech world. How did that evolve into quality?
Yeah, I have maybe an interesting journey, although I think everyone's journey is interesting in their own right. So my journey in the sciences and in healthcare actually starts through the funeral business. So growing up in Vermont, my family had a number of funeral homes, and that was my job through high school. It was going to the funeral home, working visiting hours, and helping with embalming. So I had a very unique perspective and look on life at that time, and so that's what I went into school for. So after high school, I went to a small college just outside of Boston. It's now closed. It was in Newton, called Mount Ida College, and I did 2 years there to become a licensed funeral director. And it was through those courses that really I became more interested in the sciences, in microbiology and anatomy, and ultimately medicine, and decided that I wanted to develop medicine. So right after that, I moved on to the University of Vermont, where I studied biochemistry and got a bachelor's in biochemistry there. And my goal during that time was to move to the greater Boston area and hopefully work for a biotech company and see where I would fit in the paradigm of drug development. So it took a while to get my first job, but my first job out of school, just outside of Boston in Milford, Massachusetts, I was working at a small CDMO in QC. So I had no idea, now AD, PD, QC, there's all these different areas. I didn't even really know what that means, but they were the first ones to give me a job. So it was a great opportunity, running all sorts of analytical equipment. Very little experience. They gave me a lot of opportunity. And then from there, I moved on to Genzyme in Alston, which was very different because, and a lot of people know the story of Genzyme and Genzyme Alston, but while I was there, they were under consent decree, which is, this very kind of strong approach to compliance and quality assurance, and FDA is more or less there over your shoulder for everything that you do. And then from there, I moved kind of to another Genzyme site, which is now called Vericell, and they were doing autologous cell therapy at the time, and they still are. They have a couple of commercial products. That was my first foray into autologous medicine. But at that time, I was actually ready to move on from biotech, because those experiences were very focused on manufacturing. And what I was interested in was drug development, but I didn't want to go back to school. I didn't want to get a PhD. I didn't want to become a scientist, but I did want to be part of developing drugs, not just, a part in the manufacturing process. And I didn't really realize that's what I had been working in quality control. And so it wasn't until I had an opportunity to join Bluebird Bio where I really felt that I moved on from testing the product and supporting a manufacturing facility to actually supporting drug development. And so I was there for several years. That's where I made the first official switch to quality assurance, helped with, I don't know the commercial name, but lentiglobin, as we called it at the time, drug for sickle cell disease, beta thalassemia, helped with their CAR T for multiple myeloma. Those were great experiences. And then from there, I moved on to CRISPR for I think maybe a year and a half, my first foray into quality systems. So helped with their quality systems, helped implement Viva there. And then I had my first opportunity to be head of quality at a company called Dragonfly Therapeutics. I was there for 5 years, started as an N of one, built the organization until most recently I joined BBio. And I'm hoping to have the opportunity to do it all over again.
I mean, I've heard some interesting routes into science. I've not heard funeral director before. I've had DJ, I've had waiters and all that sort of stuff. But that's a really interesting route. Do you do you regret moving into science, or would you?
I you know I don't. At the beginning of my career, I was actually moonlighting as a funeral director on the side, as you can imagine, to help pay some of the bills. And eventually, I said I've had enough of that. Interestingly, my wife's a midwife, so we always kind of
Yeah,
had both ends of the spectrum.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting conversations at home.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you first started in QC, did you have any initial idea of what quality was?
No, and I'll never forget. I remember that was after the first maybe week, and my dad called me up and he said, "Hey, how's it going?" And I said, "You won't believe it, but they make us record the serial number and expiration date on the alcohol that we use to sanitize things." I was like, "You wouldn't believe what we have to do. It's so ridiculous." And that's just the mentality someone who
Yeah,
has no experience in that field would enter it with. And you slowly learn, you slowly understand why those pieces are so important.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you must have worked with some great people over the years at Genzyme, and then Bluebird. Obviously, I know you worked with Greg and Corinne, and a few others who I've had on the podcast. Who was overseeing quality? Can you remember at Genzyme at the time when you were there?
I don't remember who was the head of
Yeah,
quality there. Yeah.
yeah,
I was when I was at Genzyme, I was about as low as they would be, as you could be. I used to go around the facility and collect the water samples. So, and then I'd take them back to the lab and I do endotoxin testing and
yeah,
nitrates. So they'd call me water boy, walking around with the buckets and filling up the samples from the Wi-Fi loops.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, when would you class your first sort of real quality leadership position?
Well, the nice thing about quality, and if your organization is built the right way, I mean, you're really a leader at every level. So when I was at Bluebird, my first real role into quality, I think I was at senior specialist level. I wasn't even at a manager level. The way that the teams were built was that there'd be a quality representative on this project, and that was me. And so I really felt like a leader in quality at that time. Of course, I had my superiors who I could
Yeah,
ask questions to, but it wasn't until my role at Dragonfly where there was there was no one in quality above me I could ask. So it was figure it out on your own, or ask your peers who are not in quality, which,
yeah,
by the way, some of my greatest mentors are not in quality. They're in drug development, they're in technical operations and CMC. And in those units, in those departments, you'll find that the more senior you get, the more that they know just as much about quality really as you do.
mm,
And they have to. And for a small organization with a very lean quality team, that's one of the keys to success. It's that your coworkers and your peers, you're you're not you're not going to battle against them. You share a vision, you recognize that you may have constraints with resources, but you understand and you have a common goal. And that's what I have found to be the biggest key to success in small startup environments. When you have a lean team, is that your peers have to have that understanding of quality assurance and
yeah.
compliance, and ultimately how to make the safest product and how to administer the safest product for the patient.
Yeah. In those early days well, I suppose not necessarily the early days, but when you were at Genzyme, when you were at Bluebird, particularly, learning from some really good people, I'm sure you mentioned you had mentors that weren't even in quality as well. Like, what what was your vision for the next sort of 5-10 years for your career? Did you see yourself going down this quality leadership route? Were you unsure? What was your vision for the next 10 years?
Yeah, my vision was to gain exposure. So to continue to feel like and to contribute at the next level to develop a new drug. And every step in my career that I've made, I feel like I've gotten closer to that. I don't first and foremost describe myself as a quality professional, and I don't really consider myself that. I consider myself a drug developer, and to develop a drug these days, it takes everyone, and it takes everyone thinking like that. If you segment yourself and say, I'm responsible for this, he's responsible for that, you're not going to succeed. And so my goal over the past several years in career moves have been to get to that point where I can be, as impactful as I can.
How did you how did you come to see that? Because that's a very, in the early days of your career, I suppose it's an interesting way of looking at it, and it's a great way of looking at the wider industry, right? You're not just a quality professional; you're a drug developer. Who was it that, or how did your eyes open up to that realization?
I think I've always wanted to be at that point. And quality assurance, my skill set in this niche is what has gotten me there. Um, and I think back to my first role in QC, I would have taken anything. I would have taken a role in research, analytical development, process development, something kind of at the bench is where I was most qualified. And I would have approached that role with the same way I've approached quality assurance, which is how can I get to that point where I'm really influencing in helping make the right decisions and pushing this technology forward so that we can make a new drug. I really think that regardless of what path I took, that was the mentality I was going to take with me.
So stepping into Dragonfly was I suppose, your first real head of quality role. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. And what year was that?
So that was about 2020.
Okay.
Right during COVID, in the heart of COVID. There were some people on site. They really didn't want folks to be on site who didn't need to be on site. And so it was difficult meeting the entire organization. And at that time, very research heavy organization. They were in clinical trials, but they weren't, when I joined, they had one clinical study going on. And by the time I left, there were 4 active clinical studies. So there was quite a bit of growth while I was there. And those were global studies. But it was, in the beginning, it was difficult. And typically what happens with these younger, early stage organizations is you will have, before that first FTE, you will have had some sort of consultant, either putting a couple of SOPs together, helping with the IND, perhaps helping with the first batch disposition, depending on when they decide to fully hire the QA role. And I was very fortunate moving into my first full-time head of quality role that there was good framework already put in place by the consultants who were there. And that really helped me. It set me up for success. Now, there's still a lot of growing pains in that first year. First real type of new job experience. And those consultants stayed on, but there was some continuity
Yeah.
there for quite a while.
How would you describe yourself as a leader, quality leader in that time? So when you stepped into your first head of quality or overseeing quality role, how would you describe yourself as a quality leader at that stage in your career?
So I don't think from then to now I've necessarily changed a whole lot. I mean, my approach to quality is you really need to make a partnership with your peers and with the other organizations that you rely so heavily on. I like open communications. I don't like saying no, because I think that we can always get to a compromise, right? And that's effective quality leadership. It's coming to the same conclusion, or having that other department come to the conclusion kind of on your behalf. And so the greatest thing is when I'm in a room and maybe we're talking about a CDMO or a clinical site, and I'm there as quality, and we have CMC or manufacturing here, and we're talking to the CDMO maybe, and something comes up, and it's the AD person or the external manufacturing person next to me who says, oh, that should be a deviation, right? Or this is a change we're going to want to open a change control for, right? And it's not quality saying that. it's your counterpart, your partner who doesn't have that quality title, who's taking on that role of quality. And if you have made the right partnership, if you've built that right partnership, and you have that level of understanding, you can get there. And it's the most effective way that I've found to employ that good quality culture in a company that so many folks talk about. So, from a leadership perspective at a small company, leadership doesn't necessarily mean leadership to your peers because or to your reports, because you may have no reports, or you may just have a few, and the people you interact with most frequently aren't going to have that quality title. So leadership to me at those stages, and at the stages that I really like working in, means teaching the folks you work with and helping them make those same decisions that you would otherwise have to make.
Yeah, it's such an important feature that, quality sitting across the organization. And I think a lot of young quality leaders really struggle with that realization that you have to build relationships and have really open lines of communication with your colleagues in other departments. And some people don't have that skill set when they're going into a leadership role. What are the key pillars of building effective relationships and having open communication with your partners in reg, in clinical, in commercial? What because there are so many nuances to building relationships, and really it is that, how do you build relationships? So it's a huge question, but if you had to narrow things down, like, are there any practical things that you developed over the course of your career that made you a good collaborator with your counterparts?
Yeah, well, beer helps, right? So, you can always ask folks if they want to get a drink after work, and that seems to, I've had good success there. But, regulatory, technical, operations, clinical, I mean, these are all areas that, these are folks you work with very closely. And, I've found that the best way to make relationships and a good working relationship is just honesty, transparency. We're all in this for the same thing. We're all in this for the patient. I mean, keeping the patient at the forefront of what we do every day and why we do that is certainly an effective way to bring the teams together. And, the organization I'm in now is very small, so it's actually not difficult to work closely. When you're in a larger organization, 500 plus, there are some new challenges there. And that's actually, from a leadership perspective, is something that I haven't most recently experienced. So I have been in these smaller organizations, and it has been easier. We're really fortunately not siloed.
What is the hardest thing then about it when you are in a small organization, from building a quality team, building relationships as a team of one?
It's prioritizing where to put your resources. So, on any given day, I can say, I would love to have this system in place. I'd love to audit this facility. I'd love to do an extra stability study, or, get a better, I don't know, inspection readiness program going. And it's easy to see. And you'll always kind of itch, like, I'd love to have that in place. It's not in place. When can I do that? But you just, you don't have the resources, and it's okay. You're not expected to early phase, but you do have to understand what is most important at any given phase. So first in human studies, phase one, what is most important? It's directly to the patient. Autologous cell therapy, what is most important? Well, it's the product, it's the chain of identity, chain of custody, your clinical processes. So you focus there and you follow the path of the product. You follow it to the patient, you understand the patient experience, and that's where you put your effort. From there, once that's foundational and that's in place, hopefully the organization is matured enough where you can start really targeting those more, I don't know, classical types of quality items, like an actual EQMS, an actual quality operations department. You have your validation team, you have your vendor management teams, and you can start to build out those pieces. But until you get a little bit further in, you really have to prioritize a different way.
Yeah. Do you find it, a lot, I guess a big part of it is when you're going through that interview process with the company, it's really understanding the leadership team who you're working with, what's the culture from the top, because if you don't have that buy-in from the top of the organization, it'll be harder to implement things as you move into it. What are the things that you look for, I suppose, when joining, BBio, for example, from the leadership perspective, to give you the confidence that this is a good organization that I'm going into?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate. Many of the folks at BBio, the leadership team, I was familiar with from Bluebird, so it wasn't a complete, leap, so to speak. But you get a good idea of what the leadership team and your coworkers are going to be like during the interviews from the questions they ask, and you can really understand, is this a role that they feel like they need filled, that they want filled, or is this a role that someone told them, oh, hey, we're going to hire a head of quality, and they all roll their eyes and they say, oh, you sure? Maybe another 6 months or another year, we can't wait on this. And that's very telling, and you can feel it. I mean, you can always.
How'd you feel it?
We can feel when we're wanted, right?
Yeah.
We can. What makes a great partnership is when those folks recognize the need. And that's very apparent during the interview process. It was for me at BBio. Everyone was, saying this is something we needed a year ago, or we have all of these projects on deck, and these are folks who are not in quality, bringing up quality initiatives. And so at Dragonfly as well, I felt the same way. Some folks I had worked with there before at different organizations, so I got a good idea of what maybe the culture was like there, and very supportive.
Yeah. And so when you join that organization, or when you join a startup, like you're in now, your quality team of one to start with, maybe a couple of consultants, but you're very much building as a standalone person. And I asked this question to a few people about the podcast, because a lot of people are in a similar position, right? They're joining a startup or a small organization as the only quality person. But what does your first 30 days look like? Sort of granular level.
Yeah, the first 30 days, it's typically a whirlwind, right? So you one, have to learn the technology. Two, you have to learn the people you're working with. You have to understand how to effectively work with those people. I mean, in my role, it was a lot of just, because we were in clinical studies already, the first thing that I wanted to understand was chain of custody. It's an autologous cell therapy, right? So the patient's very much part of this process. And so in autologous cell therapy, it's very technical in that regard. The first 30 days, it's really getting right into it. It's not, and there is some, well, are there SOPs in place? What do we have? But it's really not a fine tooth comb going over exactly what policies and processes there are. It's more, are we doing the right thing? Because we'll get to the point where we're creating SOPs that map our existing process. But is our existing process sufficient? And is our existing process ensuring patient safety? And so that's really where I focus most of my time. And then from there, you build layers onto it. Okay, we're doing this. This is right. Is there a procedure that tells us to do this? No. Okay, well, let's put that in place. That's also very well received when you can build your SOP to map an existing process, rather than saying, hey, we're bringing in this whole new arm, this whole new thing that we haven't been doing. We're going to start doing it now, and this is how to do it. That's a more difficult sell. And that's especially a more difficult sell as someone who's just joined the organization.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about, I suppose, org chart planning, because you're probably doing a lot of tactical stuff, but you also have to keep an eye on the bigger picture. What does your organization look like if we meet these milestones and inflection points over the next year, 2 years, 3 years? How do you go about mapping out your future hires, your future organization? What does it look like?
Yeah, it's kind of a fun part. It's an enjoyable part of the job, because you get to think best case, you get to think upside, you also have to think worst case. But what's unique about it is there's no single blueprint. There's nothing saying that your first hire is quality operations, your second is quality systems, and then we need someone to come in for vendor management and work closely with our clinical team. Doesn't work like that, or at least I've found that it doesn't work like that. it's very situational. And a lot of it also has to do with the strengths of, I think, the person in charge of quality. Could very well be that their background is very clinical oriented and they want to bring in someone with a strong GMP background to lead up quality operations. On the flip side, was the case when I joined Dragonfly. I had no clinical quality experience. I mean, I had worked with the clinical team through quality operations work at places like Bluebird Bio, but I really had not, I didn't understand any of these agreements. I really didn't understand what a trial master file was. A lot of these pieces that are basic, I had no understanding of. And so one of my first hires at Dragonfly was to bring someone in who had that clinical experience, but she also had a lot of vendor management experience. And so she was a candidate where she could help with audits, qualifying our vendors, but she could also sit in and importantly teach me how we're going to go about managing and partnering effectively with our clinical operations team for global clinical studies nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so that's important. But then, I've mapped out different things at BBio, and that could change. I mean, it could really change on the direction of the company. Is the next hire a quality systems person? Is the next hire quality operations? And that's typically the two big buckets that I would put your first big hires into. And I think right now either could be a coin flip. We have support through contractors who fortunately can wear the quality title, but we're still pending the growth of the full-time team.
Yeah. I mean, things change. You might have contractor who might take on another project, and then their availability and that person might be holding GCP fort down. So yeah, things change. That's I suppose the name of the startup world. So looking ahead then, Rex, what are you excited about for the next 12 months in your role?
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see our patient data expand, right? More patients. That's the most exciting part of the job for me is you have someone who's decided to sign up for a clinical study, not because it's a fun thing to do or because you're paid money, right? None of this happens. It's because one, they have a disease. They have a disease that current medicine isn't adequately treating. And two, they feel a responsibility to the rest of the community with that type of disease to do something to help future generations. And so these folks who participate in clinical studies they're so brave. I mean, the longer I'm in industry, the more I learn about what they potentially go through and learn about these different disease types, the more I realize that they're really the heroes in this whole story. And so being able to dose more patients and seeing that data come out, and we don't know if these therapies will work. We don't know if the next therapy we file an IND for will work, but we certainly hope it will. And so the next 12 months for me, the most exciting part will be getting that data. And we all know what that leads to, right? So good clinical data leads to a bigger team, leads to a more compliant company, leads to a future of rinsing and repeating. So, to me, it starts there. It starts with the data.
Yeah, awesome. And I suppose a word on the industry that you're serving, the cell therapy space. You've been in it for some time, cell and gene. How do you see things as it stands right now?
I think most people recognize it's been hit hard. Biotech as a whole is in a downturn or has been in a downturn. Maybe we've stabilized, maybe depending on who you talk to, maybe we've turned the corner. But cell and gene therapy will always have a place. I'll never forget, someone said to me once during actually my interview at Bluebird Bio, and I asked, because at that time, cell and gene therapy was very new, and my somewhat naive mind was thinking, well, this is going to cure everything. Every disease will be cured because we're going to genetically target that disease and we're going to fix whatever the root cause is. And I asked him, what do you think about the future of cell and gene therapy? And he was very pragmatic, very senior person at the company, and said, this will be another tool in the toolbox. This is not going to be the be all end all. This is not going to cure everything. But for certain diseases, for certain disease types, this will be a new tool. And that existing toolbox will always be there and will grow and expand in different ways. But we've now got this other pouch, this other toolbox. And I feel that way. I don't think cell and gene therapy is certainly going away. We'll see what the future is. We'll see, does it expand? Does it kind of stay in the lane that it's in now? I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, Rex, I normally end the show with some quick fire questions. So I've enjoyed the conversation, by the way. I think there's some really practical insights into your world, how you've gone around building teams in a lean environment, and some of the real challenges that a lot of young and aspiring quality leaders struggle with around the collaboration piece. So thank you for sharing that. Couple of quick fire questions to cap things off. If you were to go back to the start of your career, so Rex in the well, whether you want to call it as a funeral director or moving into QC, what would be the advice that you would give your younger self now?
It might seem a little cliche, but you have to work hard, because everything that you take on outside of your direct responsibilities is what's going to take you to the next level. And so if you have the opportunity, and this is in QC, to stay late and learn a new instrument, and it's not part of your job, take that opportunity, because at the very least, you're now familiar with it. And on the other hand, maybe a great job comes up that specializes in operating that type of equipment. So it is just grasp any type of opportunity that you can, and that's going to come from putting the hours in.
Who's been the biggest inspiration in your career? Whether that be personally from your personal life or professional life?
Yeah, the biggest, it's tough to say. I can say who, one of my biggest mentors is who hired me at Dragonfly. So that was Mike Nail. In CMC, never worked in QA. And when I joined, at first I reported to him, and he was, he really helped me. I think he understood that I was in a new role. I had never been in this type of position before. And everything that he did really helped, I think, draw more out of me that maybe I didn't fully believe was there. So mentors can come in many shapes.
Final question. What one piece of advice would you give to an aspiring quality leader?
It always comes back to what's best for the patient, right? Don't get too bogged down in, interestingly, what you learn first. So what you learn first is to initial and date. It's how to NA a page. It's how to reference a deviation. It's to paginate. That's what you learn first in quality assurance. And it's interesting that the further into your career you go, you recognize that's important, because those are threads that an inspector auditor can easily pull on. But that's not ultimately what's important. What's important is the larger picture, and making sure that everything you're doing adds up and builds towards what's best for the patient.
Brilliant. Rex, that's been great. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, Hamish, likewise. Thank you.